I came from a meeting yesterday. Some folks in this room were in that meeting. Paul Muller was there, Tom Tomich was there, Holly King was there. It was the third in a series of meetings called the California Ag Vision Process, which was initiated by the State Board of Food and Agriculture and the Secretary of Agriculture to embrace this idea of creating a viable, sustainable food system, agricultural system by the year 2030. And it's been a series of talks between what you would call dominant agricultural paradigm and the emerging agricultural paradigm, with a lot of stakeholders as part of that. And I have been pleasantly surprised at the progress that we've made. And that's surprising because just 4 weeks ago at Cal Poly, many of you may have heard about Michael Pollan's visit there to speak, and the controversy that emerged around that visit. Hunter Francis is in the room. He was part of actually making that happen. And there was at first a huge controversy around Michael Pollan going to a traditional agricultural university, which is really the place that creates the most CEOs of food businesses in the state of California. There was huge controversy and pushback about him going there. But at the same time, there was, I think, a breakthrough moment there. Al Mondna, who was one of the largest white rice growers in the state of California and the head of the State Board of Food and Agriculture, went to that event. And he witnessed what went on there. And 10 days ago, there was a meeting of the State Board of Food and Agriculture where stakeholders like Roots of Change, Farm Bureau, Western Growers, the big institutions, were there to report on their views on what was happening with the policy proposals that were emerging from this Ag Vision process. At that meeting, there was a very frank, honest conversation that needed to take place between Big Agriculture and the State Board. Big Agriculture basically said, look, we don't really feel comfortable with what you're doing, moving us towards this idea of sustainability. It's scaring us, it's scaring our memberships. We don't really feel like you're listening to us and we're moving too fast. It was a very frank statement, which allowed the State Board, which represents the mainstream agriculture in the state of California, to engage in a conversation with them about why they were doing it. And one of the most important things was said at that meeting was Al Mondna, the president of the board, rice grower, said, I went to the meeting in Cal Poly when Michael Pollan spoke, and I saw the students, the future leaders of agriculture, nearly bring down the house, the roof. He said, the train has left the station, and you're either going to be in the engine or the caboose. It's up to you. We need you to be part of this so that we can shape what's happening. That was a very important moment because that happened publicly. And to me, it was a moment in which I realized that the change has really begun, that the large agricultural interests, and by the way, some of those large agricultural interests are now calling Roots of Change and asking to meet, and asking to go out into the countryside and meet with their growers. This is very important because there has been resistance to this idea for a long time, and resistance still exists. But what's happening is people are starting to work with the fear and the resistance and figure out ways to engage and embrace. There was one of the slides up here had the word embrace, or embrace organic, I think is what but there is a huge embrace of change emerging, which I think is very important and hopeful. And that's where I think, that's the kind of basic dynamic I want to talk about in the minutes that I have remaining. And so I'll begin with the cultural divide that exists. There are huge cultural divides between urban and rural, between sustainable and traditional, some people call it conventional agriculture. And that divide is a place that we should be thinking about and focusing on the bridges between those worlds. Because that's how momentum is going to build, how we're going to build more synergy and momentum and translate resistance into partnership. I really believe resistance can become partnership. I remember when I was in 7th grade, I'm not the kind of guy that gets in physical fights, I'm not very big, but when I was in 7th grade, I got in a physical fight with a guy who was in my gym class. And he was actually much larger than I was, and he was a year younger. And he would always pick on me, and one day we got in this fight, physical, shocking. It was just like, boom, I hit him, whoa! But in the course of that, we actually became friends after that. And on the team, we played flag football and then later other games. We became like, we worked together on the field. And it sounds trite, but it's actually, I've seen other examples of that in time. And I actually witnessed some of that going on in the meeting, these Ag Vision meetings, where people were resistant and kind of fearful and pushed back, but now having serious conversations about how to create a California Immigration Reform Act to put in the face of the federal government the need for immigration reform, and to actually try and create a safe harbor for farm workers in the state of California. I mean, that is a really interesting conversation. Or stewardship. How are we going to enhance, create, kind of get regulation out of the way and really motivate and create more incentives for stewardship? Kind of deep conversations about how you can do that. So, I think there's a huge opportunity right now. It's very exciting. And, but we have to acknowledge the cultural divide, and we have to work with it openly and talk about it, because I think we can mitigate its negative impacts on our goals. And so, you know, is there fear or enthusiasm? Is agriculture into regeneration, or is it in a state of decay? And we talked a lot about that. If you look at kind of the traditional agricultural communities in the state, they're in a state of decay, mostly. Except for, you know, folks actually who are embracing this new agriculture are kind of the lights. So I think the research agenda going forward could focus on these issues. And what this would mean is, if you look at if you review what you've been focused on, there's a lot of incredible good work about biological integration. Actually, I think Sean Sweezy and others who worked on the BIOS and BIFs projects, I love that term that emerged from that work in the 90s and later. This idea of farmers really beginning to understand the complexity of engaging the natural world to produce food. Most people in this country have no idea what that means. The complexity, the huge challenge that really is. And we are and the research that you've been doing is the discovery of what it really means to be biologically integrated, to be a steward of biological systems. And that information is actually the tip of the spear of all of humanity in one way. Really it is. It's our learning how to survive on this planet as there are more and more people. That story can be translated into something that wakes up the American public to why it's so important to be engaged in support of agriculture. And so those stories need to be translated. The detailed research that you're doing has to be translated so that people understand how you are making their lives possible. Because there are very few of you farming and producing all the food. So I think that there's a research agenda, actually, around how to translate the information to the public. It's sociological research, it's anthropological research, and I didn't see much sociological research in the work that you've done so far. And maybe that's because the big focus has been in how do we actually farm biologically in a biologically integrated manner. And it's still a huge amount to be done. But I think we're at a point of inflection where we need to think about some of the sociological barriers and sociological opportunities, the way to tell the story and bring farmers into more relationship with their communities. We have CSAs, we have farmers markets, we have farm tours, we have that kind of stuff. But what is the next level? Last night I drove down here with Tom Tomich and we were talking about research projects in which farmers become part of research teams or are part of research teams. And I was sharing about a researcher who's doing work on genetic drift, who's using the public as sensors and as part of his research, putting up sensors in farms and communities. So that's the place that I think is really important and exciting for the future. I know there'll be a lot of people going to talk about the more kind of mainstream scientific research and production research. But I'm hoping that you'll think about other ways to engage the public and do research projects in which the public become part of farming systems, agricultural systems. And the last thing I want to say in about 30 seconds I have is that another great potential research project would be to work with the DoD, Department of Defense, on what it means, what food security, regional food security actually means, and what the implications are and what the importance are, what the justification is. Because with the budget you have, I learned this morning, it's about $15 million. I think it should be $150 million, if not more. And the way to get to $150 million in my opinion, is to justify, clarify the importance of regional sustainable agricultural systems to the security of the nation in the long term.